Hello, my most amazing artist. Thanks for joining me today. We are going on another salt dough clay adventure. This one I'm super stoked about because we're gonna make our very own salt dough garden. I'm gonna throw a bunch of ideas your way, but you can make your salt dough garden any way you want to. But before we do, art class catchphrase, I make messes. I make mistakes, but deep inside, I got what it takes. I am an artist. Big shout out to our sponsors. That would be Ticonderoga and Art to Remember. Dixon Ticonderoga is the makers of the best pencil, like basically the only pencil you're ever gonna need. You recognize them because they're bright yellow and they have that very distinct green ferrule. Did you know that a ferrule is what that little metal wrapper on the backside of a pencil's called? Sure is. You just learned something new. And if you already knew that already, well, aren't you a genius? Our other sponsor is Art to Remember. Don't forget to remember all the masterpieces you've made. The best way to do that is with Art to Remember. Did you know? You can take pictures of your artwork on your phone, pop it on over to their website, and bam, you have your very own art gallery. How cool is that? So thank you, Dixon Ticonderoga and Art to Remember, for sponsoring Art Class with Cassie. Today, you are going to need a piece of cardboard, like from a box or cereal box will do, to make your very own salt dough clay garden. I made mine a couple of days ago, and it's definitely dried out, totally sticking to the board, and it's pretty amazing. You'll need crayons to color the back of your board, and you'll also need the following ingredients to make your salt dough. A quarter cup of water, a quarter cup of salt, half a cup of flour, and food coloring. No food coloring? No problem. Use craft paint if you have it. If not, you can always paint this later. If you don't want to make your own clay, but you do want to create with clay, Play-Doh works great. Model Magic is super duper, as well as any sort of like modeling clay. Modeling clay doesn't dry out, but it's great to exercise your imagination and your hands when you work with that kind of clay. All right, let's talk about those elements of art which we will be using. They are line, shape, color, baby, color, form, value, texture, and space. And we'll also be using the principles of art, which I haven't talked about those very much. We talk about them all the time during live art class with Cassie, but not so much here. What is wrong with me? The principles of art are you ready? Well, I just had a brain toot and I can't remember. Oh, wait, it's coming back to me. Movement, unity, emphasis, rhythm, balance, and contrast. All right, guys, pinkies out, peeps. I pinky promise to do my very best to finish what I start. My stomach is growling, oh my! And to keep a positive attitude. All right, guys, let's go ahead and make some salt dough clay first and create our very own salt dough garden. Let's begin by making our salt dough clay. The first thing you're going to need is a big bowl to make your clay, a measuring cup to measure out your ingredients, that's why it's called a measuring cup, something to stir with, and I'm using food coloring. If you don't have food coloring, you could use paint, or you could just paint your project once it's dry. To make your salt dough clay, the first thing you're going to need to do is put 1/4 cup, 1/4 cup of water into your bowl. I've already done that. Next up, I'm going to add the exact same amount of salt. So I'm putting 1/4 cup of salt into my measuring cup. It's important you keep your measuring cup on a nice flat surface, so that way you get just the right amount. Looks like I got somewhere close. All right, I'm gonna pour that in, add that to my water. Now I'm going to double that amount for flour. So it was 1/4 cup of water, 1/4 cup of salt. Now I'm adding a 1/2 cup of flour. Again, I've got it on my flat surface to make sure I get just the right amount. Looks like I done added too much. Gonna give some of it back. Let's shake it out. And kinda, sorta, no? Oh my goodness, I got a little heavy-handed with the flour. There we go. That looks good enough for me. This is probably why half of my recipes when I'm cooking don't turn out, y'all. All right, now I'm gonna mix all these up. I don't know why this guy's in the way. Excuse me, cup of water. And now I'll keep stirring. Get all of those ingredients combined together. That was a half a cup of flour, quarter cup of water, and a quarter cup of salt. And I'll keep stirring until it gets a little bit clumpy and lumpy. It's going to look a little bit dry. It's at this point, when you're done stirring it, that it looks like this, that you'll want to dig in. You're going to use your hands to finish combining the ingredients by kneading or squeezing the dough. So let me go ahead and get most of it off my spatula. Look at that, came off nice and clean. And now I can combine these guys by kneading the dough. Now if your dough is really sticking to you, that means you got a little crazy with that water. You might want to balance it out with some flour. If it feels a little dry, for now, I would just leave it because we're about to add food coloring. Food coloring has water in it that might be just the right amount of water that your clay needs. All right, now that I have this nice amount of soft dough clay, it looks nice and good. It's just a little cracked, that's okay. I'm ready to go ahead and add my food coloring. I'm going to want all the colors in the rainbow, but I'm only going to be using the primary colors to create all the colors in the rainbow. The primary colors are yellow, red, and blue. Now I have some of the secondary colors. I have purple and I have green. I don't have orange, but I'm not going to use these secondary colors because I can make them. So I'm going to divide my clay into 3 equal-ish parts. There we go. And when I'm adding my food coloring can stain your hands. So if you want to have a wet towel, that's what my wet towel is for, to immediately clean my hands. Or what you might want to do is wear gloves. I'm only adding a couple of drops of food coloring. It's a concentrated color. That means it's really dark. You don't need to add a lot. If it turns out not dark enough, you can always go back and add more. So I'm just trying to fold it in carefully so I don't get it too much on me. Too late. And now I'm just gonna massage the clay. Oh, clay likey. Working that coloring through the clay. And you'll notice that it's a light color. And that's because my clay is white. And whenever you combine white with a color, it makes a tint or a light version of that color. So that's why this isn't like a bright, true red. It's a light red or a pink. Once you have your color mixed throughout, if you want it darker, you could just add more food coloring. I think this looks pretty good to me. So now I'm going to repeat these same steps to create yellow and blue. So I'm going to squish this out. Now I said earlier that if you don't happen to have food coloring, you could use paint. And when I say that, I mean this is the kind of paint you can use. Those little bottles of craft store paint, you could use that, but you'll want to use just a little bit like I'm doing. You could also use something called liquid watercolor. It looks a lot like this. Or like I said, you could just sculpt with the clay while it's wet. Once it's dry, you could paint it with a watercolor paint then, the kind that's in a little tray. Or you could just leave it. So now let's see how this yellow's working out. My hands are looking quite lovely. Looks like I got in a fight with ketchup and mustard. Got red and yellow all over my hands. All right, so this is a very light yellow because I want it to have a darker value, meaning value is the lightness and darkness of a color. My yellow was a very light yellow. I wanted it to have a darker value. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more. Work that through my clay. I'm almost finished with my 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Oh yeah, that's a beautiful yellow. Yellow is one of my favorite colors. It's too hard to pick one favorite, but yellow's pretty high up there on the list for me. Okay, time to do blue, and my hands are starting to feel a little funky. A little bit funky, so I'm just gonna clean them off with my damp towel. If you do this, make sure it's not mom's or dad's most favorite towel. Make sure it's one that, I like to have a collection of art towels, ones that are a little bit stained. See what I'm talking about? That way, when I keep making them a little bit messier, it's okay. All right, now last one. Once you have all three primary, oopsie-daisy, all three primary colors made, then we can create those secondary colors. The secondary colors are ones you can make. You cannot, you cannot make the primary colors. You cannot mix colors together and get red, yellow, or blue. That's why we're starting with these, but you can mix red, yellow, and blue, those colors together to get the secondary colors. All right, so now I've got my primary colors. It's a very light blue. I'm going to work on creating a color wheel. So a color wheel has the primary and secondary colors in it. And so I'm going to set mine up like a color wheel. So I think what I'll do first is combine a little bit of the red, a little bit of the yellow, and let's see what I get. Really depends on how much of these other colors you want. That's how much you'll want to combine. So, ooh, that might be cool just to have them kind of spiraled together for when I make my bugs or flowers. That's something to think about if you like these colors spiraled together. Look at that, red and yellow make orange. Awesome, so I'm gonna set that one right there. Let's grab a little bit of red, some of this blue, see what we get. Now my blue is a very light blue. So we'll see how this turns out. I could make it a darker value with more food coloring. Oh, I'm starting to see a really beautiful purple. Okay, now that one's almost finished. And if I want to make more, I know how to do that. I'm going to try yellow and blue. What color is missing from my color wheel? What color is missing? Let's see what I get. It looks like green, which I probably will want to make a little bit more of, simply because I'm going to need some stems for my plants and some grass. All right, now that I have my little color wheel made with my primary colors and my secondary colors, let's use this clay to create our garden scene. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of design to my cardboard, but I'm going to be pretty quick about it because I really want to dive into working on my bugs and my flowers. So I'm just going to add some loop-de-loop lines. You could color your cardboard. You could do a rubbing with the side of your crayon, but I'm just doing a little bit of a design. It will kind of break up the background a little bit so it's not just one color. Add a little bit of pattern. I'm using those principles of art like pattern, and it'll even contrast or be something a little different than my clay. Yet another element of art, and all those things will have unity. It'll bring all the parts of my masterpiece together. Okay, I'm going to start by creating, I think, a flower first. And I'm going to begin with the center of my flower. And you could do the center of your flower any way you want. You could also use any color you like. I'm starting with purple. Notice I used about a peanut-sized piece of clay because I'm going to smush this sphere into a slab. So I smushed it down onto my board, and you'll notice that it stays on your board. It should stick. If it doesn't stick, add a little bit of water to the board and your cardboard, and that water will act like glue. Okay, now I think I'll work on some flower petals. I have a lot of this yellow. I'm going to take smaller pieces, roll a sphere, roll a coil, and then let's see, put that on my flower and then squish that in place. Great. You know what would be a good idea is to make a whole bunch of these at once. That way you get the size down. But I'm just going to do it one at a time. You could even turn that into a bug. It looks like a little bit of a bug already. A big-headed bug with little bit of wings. When you're finished with your flower petals, you could, if you wanted to, I made mine a kind of a cartoon scene by adding a face. One thing you might want to have on hand is a pencil. A pencil is how I added a lot of these texture lines not only to my flower, but to the wings of my butterfly, to my dragonfly. And you know what might be a little bit interesting? I just made a flower petal that's a little smaller than the rest. Remember, variety is good, right? Making things a little bit different. Now, as I'm coming closer to the bottom, I might want to think about, where is my stem going to go? Where will I put it? And by the way, if your clay sticks too much to you, my clay was sticking a little too much to my fingers and not to my board. If that happens, put a little bit of flour on your fingers, and that'll make it so your fingers aren't sticking to your clay so much. Okay, I think I'm gonna add one more flower petal, maybe a couple more, but definitely one right here before I work on my stem. So for my stem, I'm going to be making a pretty long coil. So I guess I better get a bigger piece of clay. A coil, as you remember, because we were just doing it with the flower petals, is when you roll up and down your hand, but that's probably going to be a little too short. So you might want to use your board. Don't roll this on your table without having a piece of paper down, otherwise your clay might stick to your table. All right, if your coil cracks or breaks, just add a little bit of water. I'm just going to stretch mine out a little bit and bend it a little bit. Usually flowers aren't growing super straight. They have a little bit of a bend in them as they're trying to reach and get some sunshine. And now I see I have a little space right here for another flower petal. Cool, okay, maybe a leaf. And then I can take a break, give it a face, and work on a bug. When you do other flowers, now you know how to do it, right? You could, of course, make different shapes for your flower petals. That will give your artwork, again, variety. And if you do run out of green, the good news is you already know what two primary colors, yellow and blue, make green. For a face, I think I'm going to use yellow for the eyes. I'm thinking of contrast, really making sure those eyes pop and stand out. Oh yeah, the yellow shows up great. And then maybe a little bitty teeny tiny mouth. That will be perfect. And I'll get out my pencil in just a moment to add those pupils or details. Sweet. All right, now let's work on making, how about a dragonfly? So I'm going to make the head, the middle part, and the back side. We're going to make those three parts because a bug's body is made out of those three parts. Now, before I work on my insects, I think I'm going to use my pencil to add some texture because I want to show a little bit of texture on the stem and on the leaves. I'm using the side of my pencil and just pressing that into the clay. And I'm going to make the veins of the leaves just by adding a little bit of texture. Texture is one of those elements of art that we always talk about. Usually in our artwork, we are creating implied texture or drawing texture to show what it would look like. But with clay, you can actually create texture to show the way that something feels. All right, I've got a cute little flower here. I think what I'll work on next is a dragonfly. So insects have three parts of their body. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. Insects also have 6 legs. That's how we know it's an insect, right? Spiders have 8. Did you know they're not insects? You probably did because you're super smart. So to make the body of the dragonfly, I'm going to roll a little sphere, make a coil. If your clay's starting to get a little dry or separating or cracking, just add a tiny bit of water, work that water through the clay, and it's good as new. Now I'm going to take and roll a coil. Now to create the thorax. The thorax is the middle part. I'm just going to squish this right here. To create the abdomen on a dragonfly, it's very long and thin, so I'm just using my fingers to shape it. And now for the head, I'm going to take an extra piece of clay, roll a sphere, roll a thick coil, and I'm going to have it going the opposite direction. There we go. Now, if I want to, I'm going to pick a contrasting color, a color that's totally different, to make some eyes. Maybe I'll put one there, and one right here. And to show the pupils, I'm going to poke a little hole there and there. Great. Now, I think I'll work on the antenna. Maybe I'll use a little yellow for the antenna. rolling tiny coils. There we go. And if it's not sticking to the board, if it sticks to you more than it does the board, try adding a little water because the water can act like glue and it'll help your clay stick to your board. There we go. Now I have two little antennae. He looks like the very hungry caterpillar. Let's give him some wings. So I'm gonna take some of this clay. If I wanna I think I want them wings to be a little tie-dye. So I'm gonna take two colors, purple and blue. Let's try blending those two together and see if it makes a cool tie-dye effect. And I can tell because the clay was feeling crumbly, just needed a little bit of water. If your clay is too sticky, that means it has too much water already. Try adding more flour. Ooh, I like that. So I'm gonna take a couple of and break this into 4 pieces. And I'll use one piece, making it into a kind of a longish coil. Not really that long, is it? And now I'm going to squish it and spread it out. The more you squish that clay to your board, the better it will stick. And you don't even have to add glue. You do have to be gentle with it though when it dries. The pieces might pop off if you're not careful. The good news is if any pieces come off, just glue them back on. All right, there's this one. You don't have to bake this kind of clay. It's going to be nice and thin on this board. Just leave it out for a day or two and it should be dry. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of texture with my pencil. I looked really closely at some dragonflies online and I noticed that they had really cool texture on their wings. It almost looks a lot like a leaf. So I'm just going to add some of those. Now, what other insects or things can you add? When I was teaching the art class with Cassie kids today, they were adding things like fairies to theirs, rainbows, sunshines, whatever you want to do. I'm going to make a butterfly. I think I'll make an orange body. Again, since it's an insect, it has a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. I didn't include the feet because usually insects, they bring their feet in as they fly around. So let's see, I'm going to roll a coil. I'm trying to think about my composition or my placement of things because I need to leave enough room for those wings. So here's the head, here's the thorax, there's the abdomen. I just squished 3 little parts. Awesome. Now I'm going to make some wings. Let's see, I'm going to pick a contrasting color. Red is too similar to that orange and I have a lot of this blue. So I'm going to use some of this blue, add a little water. And I'm going to make it into 2 parts. Now with this, the wings are shaped almost like a letter B, aren't they? With a smaller curve at the bottom. So with my fingers, I'm just going to shape it as I stretch that clay onto the board. I'm just kind of pushing it out. And here's the cool thing about clay. One of my favorite things about clay is if you make something that you don't like, you're not happy with it, just peel it off and try it again. The clay dries out, add a little water. If you want to take a break, you can always take this clay, wrap it up in plastic wrap and keep it in your fridge. It'll keep for a while in case you want to take a break, go grab a snack, work again on your masterpiece later. That's something you can always do. It will be a little hard when you take it out of the fridge. Just take it in your hands and heat it up. Use your hands like a little microwave. Hold that clay, warm it up with your hands. If it's dry, you already know what to do because you guys are experts. You're good at problem solving. That's what all artists are. They're good at, this is the problem, how can I solve it? Instead of getting frustrated, think of it as like a little game you can play, right? When something gets you stuck, you're so stinking smart. How can you problem solve and find a solution? All right, I think I'll take a couple little pieces, a tiny little pieces for some eyeballs. One of there and one of there. And a boop, boop. Ooh, now it's really fun if you go online and check out all the different kinds of butterflies. Boy, are they beautiful. But one thing that they almost all have in common is that they are usually symmetrical. That means whatever design, line, shape you put on one wing, you should or you will see on the other. You don't have to make yours that way. You can make yours what's called asymmetrical, meaning they're totally different. But most butterflies, they are symmetrical. I'm gonna add some texture for some variety, one of those principles of art, maybe some more polka dots. Can't forget my antenna. So maybe a polka dot there. Now when you're finished, you now know how to make a flower. You now know how to make a dragonfly, a butterfly, and you also know this. Even if it's something I haven't shown you how to make, just think about the parts of whatever it is you're trying to make and break them down into 3 things. Is it a sphere? Is it a slab? Is it a coil? You can make anything you want with those 3 things. All right, I think I'm going to add some more texture lines to break up this little bitty space. The last thing I think I'm going to make is a snail. That one's pretty easy. So I'm going to give this guy his little antenna. So for a snail, I like to do a tie-dye snail, kind of like how I did the wings up here. On this one, I just used purple, but if you want to do a tie-dye snail, stick it to my fingers. Why you got to be like it is? I put a little water right there. Maybe that'll help. If you want to do a tie-dye snail, find 2 colors that are contrasting or different from one another. I obviously see these 2 sitting right here looking pretty nice. And you guys already know, because we just did this, that these 2 colors will make orange. But I don't want orange. I want to show that they're mixed together. So I'm just going to blend them a little bit, not completely, until I see some really cool designs. That looks pretty nifty to me. Now I'm going to roll this into a spiral. Let's see what the other side looks great. I'm going to flip it over. Now when you press this onto the board, the only problem is that you start to lose your cool spiral design. That's okay. That's where your pencil comes in handy. You can just use your pencil to kind of poke and press that little spiral right back into place. Easy. Now I think I'll add a little coil for the body. Oh, or maybe a big coil. There we go. It's Gary. Meow. It looks just like the same colors as Gary, don't you think? Isn't that the color of his snail shell? Maybe some of those antennae that he also, or she, has. And now take a look at what you've created and start to think about your composition, your placement of things. Look for any empty places that you might have. I have an empty space here, might be good for another insect. I have an empty space down here, might be good for a big leaf, maybe with some other bugs on it, or maybe just a little flower or a little fairy sitting under a leaf. Just think about all the things that you can add. If you can imagine it, then just break it down into sphere, slab, or coil. I hope that you had so much fun creating your art with me today. I absolutely love making things with you. I especially love making things out of this salt dough clay. I'm going to add some hearts, I think, to break up my space. If you enjoyed creating with me, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because there's always tons of videos just like this and more. And also, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button so that I know that you enjoyed it and had a great time. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Have an awesome day. See you real soon.